Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas. This is how to make a Grand Theft Auto style game in Unity, and welcome to episode 17. This tutorial, we're going to take a look at linking scenes together, and we're also going to allow ourselves to create a scene startup script, which means that we can kind of run a little bit of a sequence before we actually get to a playable area. And this is generally what would happen when we come out of a cutscene, so this kind of thing can be used repeatedly. Don't forget, click the subscribe button and click the bell icon as well to stay up to date with every tutorial still to come in this huge series, and indeed everything else I upload to this channel. With that in mind, let's get to work. So, to merge two different scenes and go from one scene to another requires a couple of lines of extra code. So to initialize this, we need to first go back to our original scene, which in this case is intro scene. And in here, we had something called sequence holder. And I believe all of this, after is all said and done, finishes and it fades out. It's that fading out point that we then need to switch from one scene to another. So in this case, we'll need to switch from whatever the intro scene is to whatever our main scene is. Now, how can I say this? In the long run, we'll need to modify this ever so slightly. But for now, as long as we get the mechanics of switching from one scene to another in place, everything should flow quite neatly throughout our game. So by the end of this tutorial, what I want to get to is being able to start from the intro scene, playing through, getting to the new scene, playing a quick 2 years later sort of scene, and then being able to run with our player. So if we scroll upwards on this original script, which takes us all the way through, now it's time for me to return that favor, and then fade out starts. What we need to do is at the very top, we need to add in another namespace under the UI one. And here we put using Unity engine.scene management semicolon. This is the namespace that allows us to switch between scenes and manage them effectively. So after our fade out has played, we'll wait for, let's say, another, gosh, I'm not sure, 3 seconds maybe. And after that 3 seconds, we'll then switch to a new scene. But in order to do that, we need to head back to Unity and go to the File menu and go to Build Settings. At the top, we have Sample Scene, and that is by default in Unity. It's kind of not needed at the moment, but it might be wise to leave that in as it is because we'll have scenes to add in before we even get to our intro scene, things like a main menu, splash screen, all that kind of thing. So for now, all you need to do is click on Add Open Scenes. And what that will do is add the number 1. So just remember that, number 1 as allocated to our intro scene. We can now close that. Let's head back to our script and type scene manager dot load scene. And in brackets, it's going to be, although we've not done it yet, number 2. Close bracket, semicolon, and save. So what's happening here is that we are kind of preempting what's going to happen. And although this is scene 1, when we go onto our other scene and add scene, that will automatically become scene 2. So let's save our scene right here after it's compiled. There we go. So save our scene. And let's head back to our open world scene. And now let's do the same. File, build settings, and add open scenes. So now that script will now work completely and we'll end up at this scene. But that's not all I want to do. I want to come into this scene and play the whole 2 years later thing. So to do that, what I'm going to do is take our contract killer and I'm going to turn him off just for now. And I'm going to add an extra camera somewhere in our scene, so maybe somewhere around here. So actually, I'm going to turn the contract killer back on, and he's going to start in this position here. So let's shift him this way, because I think this is where I'd like the scene to actually start. So let's bring him this way. somewhere here, and let's rotate him so he's kind of facing outwards. So he's going to start roughly around here. I think his scale might be off a little, but we'll deal with that at another time. So now let's turn him off again, and let's have another camera. So game object, and let's go to camera. And this camera is going to be animated, so it's kind of going to fade down looking at Lorenzo. So let's rotate it this way. Let's bring it in a little so it's kind of just looking at the building for now. And we're going to bring it down to look at Lorenzo. So if we press play now, we should see that camera as the main feature. Okay, perfect. So save the scene and let's head to our canvas. So we already have that fade in place, but I'm going to turn off the animator. All that'll do is it will leave a black screen rather than have an extra game object of just being a black screen. It'll have that there, and then when we're ready, we can fade into that. Perfect. So our text, let's do the same. Let's have the color set alpha as 0. And let's go to our animations folder. And let's go to general. And on the text, let's add an animation. So I'm going to call this animation fade in text anim. And what we'll do is over the course of 1 second, so make sure we press record and set the first keyframe as 0. And we just want to make sure that the alpha on this is set to 0. Then after 60 frames, which is 1 second, let's have the alpha set as full. So then let's have it displayed on screen for 5 seconds. So we need to add another 300 frames to this, so 360. And then let's set our alpha as 255 again. So if you just drag the bar down and then drag again, it will set that keyframe, no problem. And if I just scroll along here, you can see it's set perfectly. So then we'll fade out after another second. So add another 60 frames to that. So that'll be 420, and then set the alpha back to 0. And let's press the record button to stop. Head back to our project window and fade in text, click and untick loop time so it only plays once. So we should be able to see this in action now. 2 years later, and a couple of seconds, and it fades out. And then we're going to write a script which allows us to fade in, and then our camera will play. So we're going to create another quick sequence of events to begin this scene in a relative manner. So let's go to our scripts. And let's go to, in fact, we'll create a new folder within the scripts folder. We'll have this as open world. Right click, create C# script. I'm going to name this AA just for simplicity, because it's going to be the first script that we'll ever come across in here. And opening. So let's open it up in Visual Studio. And a couple of things that we need to set here. Not too many variables, but don't worry about them at all. We might need to bring in the fade out as well from our other scene, so we'll kind of preempt that as we go along. We can get rid of void update, we don't need it, and we can get rid of any annotations. So let's start with public game object fade in. So that'll be the one we have already, where we just need to activate the animator on there. Next will be the text, public game object, the text. Next will be the camera, because we're going to activate the animator on that when we create an animation for it. So public game object, initial camera, semicolon. Next will be the fade out that we'll bring in from the other scene. So public game object fade out, semicolon. And finally, it's going to be our player. So public game object the player semicolon. So all we need to do is I'm going to save that script now and just go back into the other scene and re-import the fade out that we have, just because I want everything to flow neatly by the time we press play at the end of this tutorial. So let's go back to our scenes. Let's go to intro scene. Yes, we want to save. And let's head to the canvas again and fade out. Let's copy that, head to open world and paste it in the hierarchy and then drag it into the canvas. We'll leave it as off as well. So next thing, let's head back to our script. And beneath void start, we're going to use a coroutine again because we're controlling a couple of things with time as well. So I enumerator, and let's call this open begin. Obviously our open world begins here, so we'll call it open begin. Right, so we'll yield, return new, wait for seconds, and we'll just wait for 1 second, and then we'll turn on the text. So if we go to our text object and turn it off up here, so it should just be a blank screen when we start now, we'll have the text.setActive true, semicolon. Next, what we need to do is wait for just a couple of seconds. It's going to be, what, 7 in total? So yield, return, new, wait for seconds, and 7. At which point we then need to fade in. So fade in dot get component animator dot enabled equals true, semicolon. So next, what that's happening here is it's basically fading into our scene, and I think at the same time we're going to want to allow our camera to pan down over the course of a couple of seconds. So I'm going to save that script, head back to Unity. I know we're going back and forth a little bit, but I think this kind of back and forth bit will get you into the habit of being able to multitask, doing a couple of different things at once within the same game. So let's take this camera, which, like I said, is technically a fake camera, and let's create an animation for it. So let's go to animations, general, and let's go on animation and create, and let's have this as initial camera anim, and press record. So let's set that first keyframe. We're only going to change, at least for me, on the y-axis, so its position on the y-axis. So I'm going to start by copying what is there on the y and just repasting it so it sets that keyframe on the y. Again, you don't necessarily have to do this. You could deal with rotation, you could deal with the x position, z position. It's entirely up to you. I'm showing you the mechanics, you just adapt. So let's do this over the course of, let's say, 5 seconds again. So by frame 300, we want this camera to be, let's say, there. So press record, head back to project, click on initial camera, and let's untick loop time, and then click on the camera again and untick animator when it becomes available. So let's just quickly press play, just to run through the motions. So everything should be okay. Just make sure we untick that animator there. I'm going to save the scene. So everything now should be set ready for us to be able to play this as intended. So we've got the fade in animation being enabled after that 7 seconds. And at the same time, I'm going to have initial camera dot get component animator dot enabled equals true. Now our fade out is going to be over the course of, I think it's about maybe 2 seconds. So to allow the camera to actually flow smoothly, I want the fade out and the camera to end their animations at the same time. So here we're going to yield, return new, wait for seconds 3 semicolon. And these animations won't repeat because we've said not to repeat. At that point, we're going to put fade out dot set active true. And I'm also going to put fade in dot set active false right there. Reason being is we're going to reset that so we can replay the animation because I want to fade into our player. And after that, yield return new, if I can spell new, wait for seconds. We'll wait for 3 seconds. And then after that, we'll have fade in dot set active true semicolon. But what we need to do is just before we actually set that fade in as on, we need to set our player on. So the player dot set active true. And finally, we need to turn off that initial camera. So initial camera dot set active false. And I might just wait an extra half a second there just for convenience. So we'll wait for 0.5f, but we'll change this to 2.5f. Obviously f for being the float. And let's save that script. Head back to Unity. And then let's add a new game object. Again, this will be... Oh, what's given us an error? Oh, that's fine. Okay. A game object, create empty. And we'll call this sequence holder. Again, much like the last one. And I'm going to drag that to the top. And then add that script. So open world, AA opening, onto there. And fade in is right there. Text, right there. Initial camera, here's the camera. Fade out. And finally, contract killer, which is the player. So I'm going to save that scene. I'm not going to start from the beginning. I'm just going to start from this scene just to make sure everything is okay here. And then we'll experience the entire sequence. Okay. Schoolboy Error by Jimmy Vegas. We haven't actually started the coroutine. So in the void start, we need to go into start, coroutine, and in brackets, the name of your coroutine. Open, begin, open close bracket, semicolon, and resave. Classic schoolboy error. Okay, compiled. So now, let's press play. And this little sequence should play out quite nicely 2 years later. And something has gone astray. I do believe it is our animator. So to get around that, I also noticed we need to shift around where our player is. So if we take our player, and we could always play around a little bit more, but best thing to do, I am actually going to hold Control, press D to duplicate our contract killer, create a copy of him. But I'm going to remove character control from him. You may think, why are you doing that, Jimmy? Why? He's a dummy. He's a fake. He doesn't really need to exist, but we can always turn him off. So I'm going to bring him up to there, rename him as contract killer fake. So we'll declare him as a new variable. Public game object. I'm going to put killer fake semicolon. So all we need to do is when we turn this off, or rather turn the player on here, we just need to go killer fake dot set active false semicolon. So the dummy has gone, the real one is now replaced. And we also probably need to have fade in dot set active true, and then just replay that animation. So fade in dot get component animator open close bracket dot play, and in brackets and quotes the name of the animation, which I forget what it's called. Let's go to the animator component, and Okay, so it's fade in anim. Okay, that's fine. Is it fade in anim? It is, isn't it? It is there, yeah. So fade in anim. Fade in anim. Quote, close bracket, semicolon, save. Head back to Unity. And let's quickly add in our fake contract killer to the sequence holder. And save scene, and let's press play. And we should see, once again, the sequence play out as intended. So, yeah, 2 years later. Obviously, you don't need to do it the exact same as me. You can chop and choose how you want it to be. Ah, I know why that's happening. Last one there. I think we need to turn off the fade out. That'll be why. So after initial camera, fade out dot set active false, semicolon, and save. So I know this sequence will play perfectly now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our intro sequence and let the whole thing play. So we'll be starting from our intro sequence, playing through up until the point where we can actually control our character. So let's head to scenes, intro scene, and let's check this out. So I'm going to go quiet for just a couple of seconds while this plays out.
You asked for this, George. Lorenzo, I swear it wasn't me. You squeal on Horseface, you're sleeping with the fishes. Lorenzo, please.
I think I might change some of this post-processing.
My name is Steve Lorenzo. 3 years ago, Jimmy Horseface tried to have me whacked. Set me up. Now it's time for me to return that favor.
Okay, so far so good. We should fade and then switch to our new scene. Perfect. Okay, so there is one little bug there, as we saw with the... Yeah. Okay, so overall, that's working as intended. The only difference there is it kind of flashed at the end, but that's not too much of a difference. We can always just play around with some of the settings here, or the timings, and that will disappear. So overall, I'm happy with that result. So let's head back to our open world. And let's talk about the next tutorial. Next tutorial, we're going to expand this city a little bit more. You may have already done that, but I'm just going to take a couple of seconds, just kind of expand it so we have a city to explore rather than just this one city block. We'll look at triggers, and we're also going to look at picking up a gun for Lorenzo. So guys, until that next tutorial, thank you very much for watching.